The last human soldier was dying in space. His ship was broken. His crew was gone. His hope was fading. Then an alien widow appeared from nowhere. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her people had forbidden it. But she came anyway. And what she did next changed everything we thought we knew about First Contact. This isn't just another space story. This is about the moment humanity almost ended, and the one being who refused to let that happen. But the truth behind this will shock you. Because this widow wasn't acting out of kindness. She wasn't following orders. She was breaking the most sacred law of her entire civilization. And the reason why? That's where this story gets really crazy. See, 3 things happened that nobody saw coming. First, this warrior wasn't just any soldier. He was carrying something that could save or destroy entire worlds. And he didn't even know it. Second, the widow had lost everything in a war humans didn't know existed. Her choice to save him wasn't random. It was calculated, personal, and dangerous. Third, what happened between them in those final hours? It created a bond that terrified both their governments. Because it proved something neither side wanted to admit. That we're not as different as we think. That connection can form in the darkest places. And that sometimes one choice by one person can rewrite the future of 2 species. You've probably heard stories about alien first contact before. The scary kind. The invasion kind. The we come in peace kind. This isn't that. This is about the moment when everything hung by a thread. When politics and war and fear all collided in one broken ship floating in the void. And one widow decided that some things matter more than following the rules. I've studied hundreds of HFY stories. Stories about humanity's strength, our resilience, our refusal to give up. But this one is different. Because for once, we weren't the heroes. We were the ones who needed saving. And the being who saved us? She did it knowing it would cost her everything. Let me show you exactly how this happened. To understand this story, you need to know where it started. Earth had just won its first interstellar war. Sounds great, right? We beat the aliens. We proved humans could fight back. We showed the galaxy we weren't weak. But here's what nobody tells you about winning a war in space. It costs everything. Our fleets were destroyed. 90% of them gone. The ships that survived were barely holding together. Our colonies were in ruins. Supply lines were cut. And Earth itself? Earth was exhausted. We'd won. But we'd lost almost everything winning. And that's when the real problems started. See, the aliens we fought, they were called the Chrythons. Big, aggressive, territorial. They'd been expanding for centuries. We were just in their way. But humans did what humans do best. We adapted. We fought dirty. We used tactics they'd never seen. And eventually, we pushed them back. The war ended with a treaty. A shaky one. Both sides agreed to stay in their own space. No more fighting. No more contact. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Because while we were celebrating, another alien race was watching. And they had questions. The Veiled Coalition. That's what they called themselves. A group of species who'd been hiding from the Chrythons for generations. They'd never fought back. They just avoided. Stayed quiet. Stayed hidden. And they'd watched humanity do the impossible. Now here's the first surprise that changes everything. The coalition didn't hate humans. They were curious about us. Maybe even impressed. But they also had a rule. A big one. No contact with aggressive species. And humans? After what we'd done to the Chrythons, we definitely counted as aggressive. So the coalition made a decision. Stay away from Earth. Let humanity handle its own problems. Keep the galaxy stable by keeping us isolated. But rules are only as strong as the people who follow them. And that's where she comes in. Her name was Saren. She was a veiled. Her species looked almost human, except for the silver markings on their skin and eyes that glowed faint blue. She'd been a medic in the Coalition's refugee corps. She'd saved thousands of lives during their long retreat from Chrython space. And then she'd lost everything. Her mate died in a Chrython raid. Her colony was destroyed. Her people scattered across a dozen refugee stations. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near human space. Coalition law was clear. But Saren had stopped caring about laws. Because here's the second surprise. She'd been studying humans. Quietly. against every rule. She'd intercepted our broadcasts, learned our languages, watched our war from a distance, and she'd seen something in humanity that reminded her of what her people had lost. The will to fight back, the refusal to give up, the stubborn, reckless belief that you could win against impossible odds. Her people had forgotten that. They'd chosen survival over resistance, safety over courage. But humans? Humans were different, and Saren wanted to understand why. Now let's talk about the warrior. His name was Cade, 32 years old, former combat pilot, one of Earth's best. He'd survived 17 major battles. He'd earned medals he never wore. He'd lost friends he still dreamed about. And when the war ended, he volunteered for the most dangerous job left. Deep Space Patrol. See, the treaty with the Crithans wasn't perfect. There were disputed zones, gray areas, places where both sides claimed territory. Somebody had to watch those borders, make sure nobody started the war again. That was Cade's job. He flew alone, just him and his AI co-pilot. Weeks at a time in the dark between stars. Most patrols were boring. You'd scan empty space, check old battle sites, make sure no Crithan ships were sneaking through. But not this time. This time, Cade found something nobody expected. A derelict ship, Crithan design, floating dead in neutral space. Shouldn't have been there. The treaty said all ships had to leave the border zones. But here it was. Dark, quiet, no power signature. Cade's orders were clear. Report it. Don't approach. Let the fleet handle it. But something felt wrong. Because here's the third surprise that sets everything in motion. The ship wasn't empty. Cade's sensors picked up a faint life sign. Something alive inside that wreck. And that's when everything went sideways. Because standard procedure said ignore it. It's probably a trap. Crithans were known for ambushes. But Cade had been a medic before he was a pilot. He'd taken an oath once. A human oath. To help those in need. No matter what. And that oath was about to collide with two civilizations' worth of fear and politics. Now here's where things get really interesting. Cade made a choice that would change two species forever. He docked with the derelict. His AI screamed warnings. The ship could be rigged to explode. Could be full of hostile survivors. It could be a dozen different kinds of trap. But that life sign was fading. Whoever was inside had maybe an hour left. Cade suited up and went in. The Crithan ship was a nightmare. Battle damage everywhere. Hull breaches sealed with emergency foam. Blood frozen on the walls. This wasn't an ambush. This was a massacre. Cade moved through the corridors carefully. His weapon ready. His heart pounding. And that's when he found the survivor. Except it wasn't a Crithan. It was Saren. She was barely conscious. Her suit was damaged. She'd been trapped in that ship for 3 days. And here's the first big reveal that nobody saw coming. She wasn't there by accident. Saren had been tracking Crithan movements in the border zone. Against coalition orders. She'd discovered something. Something big. The Crithans were planning to break the treaty. They had a hidden fleet. Ships they'd kept secret during the peace talks. And they were gathering in neutral space. Preparing for a second war. Saren had tried to report it to the coalition. But they'd ignored her. They didn't want to get involved. They wanted to stay hidden. So she'd done something desperate. She'd stolen a small coalition scout ship. She'd gone to investigate herself. And she'd been ambushed by the very Crithans she was tracking. They'd disabled her ship. Boarded it. And when they realized she wasn't human, they'd panicked. Because Crithans thought humanity was alone. They didn't know about the veiled coalition. Suddenly their enemy had allies they didn't know existed. So the Crithans did what they do best. They attacked. But Saren was good. Really good. She'd fought them off. Killed 3 of them. Made it to their ship when hers exploded. And then she destroyed their communications array, so they couldn't report what they'd found. But the damage was done. The Crithan ship was dying. And Saren was dying with it. Until Cade showed up. Now here's where the story gets really intense. Cade didn't know any of this yet. All he saw was an alien who needed help. Not Crithan. Something else. Something new. His first thought? This changes everything. His second thought? She's dying right now. Figure it out later. He got Saren out of the wreck, back to his ship, into his medical bay. And that's when she woke up. Imagine this moment. Really picture it. Saren opens her eyes. She sees a human face. The first human she's ever met. The species she's been studying from afar. The people her government said were too dangerous to contact. And this human just saved her life. Cade sees an alien who's not trying to kill him. Who's injured and scared and clearly not an enemy. Everything they'd been taught said this couldn't happen. But it was happening anyway. Saren spoke first. In perfect English. You shouldn't have saved me. Cade pulled off his helmet. Smiled. Said the most human thing possible. Yeah, I get that a lot. Now here's the revelation that makes this story matter. In that moment, everything changed. Not because of politics. Not because of strategy. Not because of some grand plan. But because two people looked at each other and saw past the species. Past the fear. Past the propaganda. They saw someone who needed help. And someone willing to give it. That's the thing about first contact stories. We always imagine it'll be formal. Planned. Government officials and translators and protocols. But real first contact? It's messy. It's personal. It's one choice made by one person who refused to look away. Cade had maybe a million questions. But he asked the most important one first. Are you okay? Saren had maybe a million things she should say. Warnings. Explanations. Apologies for violating coalition law. But she answered honestly. No. But I will be now. That right there. That simple exchange. That was the moment that saved humanity. Because Saren made a decision in that moment. She was going to trust this human. She was going to tell him everything. About the coalition. About the Krithan fleet. About the second war that was coming. About how humanity was about to be blindsided by an enemy they thought they'd defeated. And Cade made his own decision. He was going to listen. Even though his training said don't trust unknown aliens. Even though his orders said report to command immediately. He sat down. He gave Saren water. And he listened to what she had to say. Now let me break down why this is so important. First contact between species usually happens one of two ways. Either it's peaceful but formal. Lots of distance. Lots of caution. Years of careful diplomacy before any real trust forms. Or it's violent. War first. Maybe peace later if anyone survives. But this was different. This was intimate. Personal. Built on an act of compassion that broke every rule. And it created something neither government wanted. A bond between two individuals that couldn't be easily controlled. Because here's what Saren told Cade in those first hours. The Krithans had 30 capital ships hidden in dark space. They were going to hit Earth's colonies first. Wipe them out before humanity could respond. Then they'd push for Earth itself. This time they wouldn't stop until humanity was extinct or enslaved. The coalition knew, or suspected, but they weren't going to warn us. Because getting involved meant exposing themselves. Meant risking their own safety. They'd rather let humanity die than take that chance. Saren couldn't accept that. She'd lost everything to the Krithans already. She wasn't going to watch another species fall, so she'd tried to stop it alone. And nearly died trying. Cade sat there processing all of this. An alien conspiracy. A hidden war. His own people facing extinction and nobody knew but him. And this widow who'd just broken every law of her civilization to try to save his species. He asked the question that cut through all of it. Why did you do it? Why risk everything for people you've never met? Saren's answer is something you need to hear. Because I've lived in a galaxy ruled by fear. Where good people hide while evil people act. And I'm tired of hiding. That statement. Right there. That's humanity in a nutshell. But it was coming from an alien. And that meant something profound. Something neither species had realized was possible. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. What happened next broke every rule of interstellar politics. Cade had a choice to make. Report everything to Earth Command. Let the military handle it. Standard procedure. Safe. By the book. But here's the problem. By the time Cade reported, by the time Earth Command analyzed the intelligence, by the time they decided to act, the Crithan fleet would already be moving. Colonies would be burning. People would be dying. Earth's fleet was scattered, recovering from the First War. It would take weeks to gather a proper defense. Weeks they didn't have. Saren knew this. She'd calculated it already. That's why she'd been working alone. And that's when she made Cade an offer that changed everything. Come with me, to Coalition space. We'll get proof of the Crithan fleet. Something your leaders can't ignore. And maybe I can convince my people to help. Cade should have said no. Should have followed orders. Should have stayed in human space where it was safe. But he thought about those colonies. About the families living there. About the kids who'd grow up without parents if this war started again. And he thought about the person sitting across from him. An alien who'd already risked everything to try to save his species. If she could break her rules, maybe he could break his. So Cade made a decision that would haunt him and save him in equal measure. He said yes. They jumped to Coalition space that night. 2 people in a tiny patrol ship, carrying the weight of 2 civilizations. And that's where this story goes from incredible to absolutely insane. Because Coalition space wasn't what Cade expected. It wasn't what anyone would expect. First, it was beautiful. Space stations built into asteroids. Cities on moons that glowed with bioluminescent plants. Ships that moved like living things. The Veiled Coalition wasn't one species. It was dozens. All of them refugees from Crithan expansion. All of them hiding, building, surviving. They'd created something remarkable. A civilization built on cooperation instead of conquest. But here's the revelation that changes how you see everything. They were terrified. Not of the Crithans. They'd lived with that fear for centuries. They were terrified of humanity. Because humans had done what the Coalition never could. We'd fought back. We'd won. We'd proven the Crithans could be beaten. And that meant humans were dangerous. Unpredictable. A wild card in galactic politics. The Coalition's leaders had made a calculation. Humans were probably going to win or lose their next war without help. Either way, the Coalition would stay hidden. Safe. But Saren arriving with a human in tow? That shattered their carefully maintained isolation. Suddenly they had to make a choice. Keep hiding. Or do something. Cade and Saren went straight to the Coalition Council. The governing body that represented all the refugee species. And Cade saw something he'd never forget. Dozens of different alien species. All of them staring at him with a mix of fear and curiosity. He was the first human they'd ever seen in person. The first representative of the species that had done the impossible. Saren spoke first. She presented her evidence. Scan logs showing Crithan fleet movements. Communications intercepts proving they were planning another attack. The council listened. They studied the data. And then they said exactly what Saren knew they'd say. This is not our concern. We cannot risk exposure. The human species must defend itself. That's when Cade did something nobody expected. Something that still gets talked about in Coalition history. He stood up, looked at every council member, and he told them the truth. You're right to be scared. Humans are dangerous. We fight when we should run. We take risks that don't make sense. We're messy and loud and we break things. The council nodded. This confirmed their fears. But Cade wasn't done. But you know what else we are? We're the species that never gives up. We're the ones who fight for others. We're the ones who believe things can be better even when everything says they can't. He pointed at Saren. This woman broke your laws to save my species. She risked everything because she believed it was right. That's not a human trait. That's a universal one. And if you can't see that, then maybe you deserve to stay hidden forever. The council chamber went silent. Because Cade had just said out loud what many of them had been thinking for years. They were alive. But were they really living? They'd survived by hiding. But what kind of civilization was that? Now here's where the story takes its most important turn. One council member stood up. An elder of the veiled species. She looked at Saren with something like sadness. You have broken our most sacred law. You have exposed us to a dangerous species. You should be exiled for this. Saren didn't flinch. She'd known this was coming. But the elder wasn't finished. However, you have also reminded us of something we forgot. That courage matters. That hiding is not the same as living. That sometimes the right choice is the dangerous one. She turned to the rest of the council. I propose we vote, not on whether to punish Saren, but on whether to help humanity fight this war. The chamber erupted. Half the council was shouting support. Half was screaming opposition. Humans were too dangerous, too aggressive, too likely to turn on them later. But helping humans meant fighting the Chthons. Meant finally standing up to the enemy they'd been running from for generations. Cade sat there watching his fate and his species' fate being decided by aliens he'd just met. And Saren sat beside him, calm, ready for whatever came next. The vote took 3 hours. Species after species debated, argued. Some walked out in protest, but in the end, the result came down to one thing. Saren's choice to save Cade had inspired something the Coalition thought was dead. The belief that you could risk safety for what was right. The vote passed, barely, by 3 votes out of 70. The Coalition would help humanity. They'd share their intelligence on the Chthon fleet. They'd provide support ships. They'd train human crews on Coalition technology. But they made one condition. The alliance would be secret. Earth's government would know about the Coalition, but the general public wouldn't. Not yet, because the Coalition still needed to protect itself. Still needed the option to disappear if things went wrong. Cade agreed. He didn't have much choice. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. The thing that makes this story really matter. In those 3 hours of debate, Cade and Saren sat together. 2 people from different species. And they talked about their lives, their losses, their fears for the future, and they realized something profound. They understood each other, not despite being different species, but because of everything they'd both been through. Loss, war, the weight of impossible choices. That understanding, that connection, that was the real first contact. Not the council's vote, not the political alliance, but 2 people seeing each other as people. And that would matter more than anyone knew. Because the war that was coming, it wouldn't be won by ships or weapons or tactics. It would be won by the bond between one human and one alien widow. A bond that would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. This brings us to the most shocking discovery of all. The Chthon attack came 3 weeks later, right on schedule. Just like Saren's intelligence predicted. 30 capital ships, hundreds of fighters, aimed straight at humanity's outer colonies. But this time, humans weren't alone. Coalition stealth ships had been shadowing the Chthon fleet for days, feeding targeting data to Earth's defense forces. When the Chthons jumped into colonial space, they expected surprise. They expected easy targets. Instead, they found a trap. Human warships hit them from 3 sides. Coalition support vessels jammed their communications. Long-range railguns tore through their formation before they could react. The battle lasted 6 hours. And when it was over, the Chthon fleet was broken. Earth had won its second war in the first engagement. Against impossible odds. With help from allies nobody knew existed. You'd think this would be the happy ending. Humanity saved. Alliance formed. Peace secured. But that's not where this story ends. That's where it gets really complicated. Because here's the climax revelation that changes everything you thought you knew. The Chthon attack? It was never about Earth. It was about the Coalition. See, the Chthons had known about the veiled species for decades. They'd been hunting them, trying to find Coalition space, trying to finish what they'd started. But the Coalition was good at hiding. Too good. So the Chthons created a plan. Attack humanity. Draw out anyone who might help us. Use that to track them back to their hidden systems. They were using humans as bait to find their real enemy. And Saren's rescue of Cade? That had been caught on sensors. The Chthons knew a non-human ship had been in the area. They knew the secret was out. So they accelerated their plans. Hit humanity hard. Forced the Coalition to show themselves. And it worked. The moment Coalition ships engaged in the battle, Crithen tracking beacons activated. Secret sensors that survived the fight. They couldn't follow every ship, but they got enough data, enough trajectory information, enough to narrow down where coalition space might be, to turn a galaxy-wide search into something manageable. Cade and Saren learned about this 3 days after the battle. Coalition intelligence intercepted Crithen communications. They were mobilizing, not for another attack on humanity, for an invasion of coalition space. Everything Saren had tried to prevent, her breaking the law, her saving Cade, her convincing the Council to help. It had led the Crithens right to her people's doorstep. The Coalition Council called an emergency session. And this time they weren't debating. They were screaming. Half the Council wanted to blame Saren. If she'd followed the law, if she'd stayed away from human space, if she'd let Cade die, none of this would be happening. The other half pointed out the obvious. The Crithens were coming anyway. At least now they had human allies to help fight them. But here's where the story gets absolutely devastating. Saren stood in that council chamber, listened to species that she'd saved, people she'd protected, and they were calling her a traitor. Cade watched this alien who'd risked everything to save his people, who'd been willing to be exiled, who'd shown more courage than anyone he'd ever met, and he saw her breaking. So he did the most human thing possible. He stood up and started yelling right back. You want to blame someone? Blame me. I'm the one who agreed to come here. I'm the human who exposed you. So exile me, punish me, but leave her alone. The council was stunned. A human defending one of their own, taking responsibility for consequences he couldn't have predicted. But here's the revelation that hits like a hammer. The veiled elder who'd supported Saren before? She stood up too. Enough! We are wasting time blaming each other when we should be preparing for what comes next. The Crithens know where we are. That cannot be changed. But what we do now, that will define us. She looked at Saren and Cade. These two showed us something we'd forgotten. That courage isn't reckless. That hiding isn't the same as wisdom. That sometimes doing the right thing has consequences. And you face those consequences together. Then she said something that would echo through coalition history. We have two choices. Run again. Hide deeper. Hope the Crithens never find us. Or we stand and fight, with our human allies. And we show the galaxy that prey can become hunters when they have something worth fighting for. The vote this time was different. Species that had opposed the alliance before were changing their minds. Because the Crithens had been the coalition's nightmare for generations. The enemy they'd been running from. The force they'd been too afraid to face. But seeing humans fight them, seeing it was possible to win, that changed the equation. Fear is a powerful force. But hope? Hope is stronger. The coalition voted to fight. Not just to help humanity, but to fight for themselves. For their own freedom. For their own future. And they asked Cade and Saren to lead the joint task force. A human and a veiled. Working together. Planning strategy. Combining two completely different approaches to warfare. Coalition technology was advanced. Stealth systems. Energy weapons. Shields that could deflect most attacks. But they'd never used them aggressively. Only for defense. For hiding. Human technology was crude by comparison. Kinetic weapons. Nuclear missiles. Ships that were basically armored boxes with engines. But humans had something the coalition didn't. Experience fighting the Crithens. And winning. Over the next 3 months, Cade and Saren built something unprecedented. A joint fleet combining the best of both civilizations. Coalition stealth ships equipped with human railguns. Human carriers deploying coalition fighters. Mixed crews learning to work together despite language and cultural barriers. And at the center of it all, a human warrior and an alien widow who'd started all of this with one choice in the dark. They spent 16 hours a day working, planning, training crews, preparing for a war neither side wanted but both had to fight. But here's the part that makes this story truly powerful. In the quiet moments between shifts, they talked about what would happen after the war, about whether two species could really trust each other, about whether their personal friendship could survive the weight of what they'd created. Cade asked the question that had been haunting him. Do you regret it? Saving me? Knowing what it led to? Saren was quiet for a long time. When she answered, her voice was steady. Every choice has consequences. Some good, some terrible. But that doesn't make the choice wrong. I saved you because it was right. The consequences. We'll face those together. That word, together, that was the real revolution. Not the military alliance. Not the combined fleet. But the idea that different species could face their fears and their futures side by side. The Krithan invasion fleet arrived 2 weeks later. 300 ships. The largest force they'd ever assembled. They expected to crush the coalition in one strike. To end the prey species that had eluded them for so long. Instead, they found Cade and Saren waiting with a combined fleet of coalition and human ships. The battle that followed? That's a story for another time. But here's what matters. 2 species that had been hiding and fighting alone, they stood together. They fought together. And they won together. Not because either side was strong enough on their own, but because they'd learned to combine their strengths, to cover each other's weaknesses, to trust each other when trust should have been impossible. And it all started because one widow refused to let one warrior die alone. Because one human chose to listen instead of fear. Because 2 people decided that connection mattered more than rules. So what does all this mean for us today? This story isn't just about aliens and spaceships. It's about something deeper. Something that matters right now in our real world. Let me break down what we can learn from Cade and Saren's story. First, let's talk about the power of individual choice. Both of them broke rules. Big ones. Saren violated coalition law. Cade ignored Earth's protocols. Neither of them had permission. Neither of them had backup. They just did what they thought was right. And it changed the course of history for 2 entire civilizations. Now think about your own life. How many times have you seen something wrong but stayed quiet because it wasn't your place to speak up? How many times have you wanted to help but followed the rules instead? I'm not saying break every rule you see, but I am saying this. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking a risk. Sometimes it means standing up when everyone else sits down. Saren could have stayed in coalition space, followed orders, kept herself safe, but thousands of humans would have died. And her own people would have been found eventually anyway. Cade could have reported everything and gone home. Safe. By the book. But colonies would have burned while bureaucrats debated what to do. Both of them chose courage over safety, action over waiting. And that choice rippled out into something neither of them could have predicted. What does that mean for you? It means your choices matter. More than you think. Even when you feel small. Even when the problem feels too big. Second, let's talk about connection across differences. Cade and Saren came from different worlds. Different biologies. Different cultures. Different everything. Every rational reason said they shouldn't trust each other. Earth and the coalition had no relationship. No treaties. No common ground. But they connected anyway. Because pain is universal. Loss is universal. The desire to protect others is universal. They looked past the surface differences and saw what mattered. That they both wanted the same things. Peace. Safety. A future where their people could thrive. Now apply that to Earth. Right now. Today. We have people separated by borders. By languages. By religions. By politics. By skin color. By a million different labels we use to sort ourselves into us and them. But underneath, we're all human. We all want similar things. Safety for our families. Opportunity for our kids. A world that's a little better than the one we inherited. Cade and Saren proved that connection is possible even across species. So why can't we do it across our much smaller differences? I'm not saying it's easy. The story shows it's not. There was suspicion, fear, political resistance from both sides. But it was possible, and necessary, and ultimately successful because 2 people decided to try. Third, let's examine the cost of hiding versus fighting. The coalition had survived for generations by hiding, staying quiet, avoiding confrontation, playing it safe. And yeah, they survived. But they didn't thrive. They lived in constant fear. They built their entire civilization around not being noticed. That's not living. That's just existing. Humans took the opposite approach. We fought when fighting seemed impossible. We took risks that looked like suicide. We refused to hide even when hiding made sense. And we paid a price for that. Lost lives, destroyed fleets, colonies in ruins. But we also gained something: respect, allies, the knowledge that we could face our fears and come out the other side. The coalition finally learned that lesson. That sometimes you have to risk what you have to gain something better. That safety at all costs isn't really safety. It's just delayed fear. What does this mean in practical terms? It means don't let fear make all your decisions. Yes, be smart. Be careful. But don't let caution become cowardice. Whether it's starting a business, pursuing a relationship, standing up for what's right, or chasing a dream that seems impossible, sometimes the safe choice is actually the most dangerous, because you never find out what you could have been. Fourth, the power of unlikely alliances. Neither humans nor the coalition could have beaten the Krithans alone. Humans had spirit but limited resources. The coalition had technology but no combat experience. Together, they were unstoppable. Each side's strength covered the other's weakness. Human aggression plus coalition stealth. Coalition technology plus human tactics. This is true in every aspect of life. Business, relationships, community building, problem solving. The best solutions come from combining different perspectives, different skill sets, different ways of thinking. But we tend to work with people like us. Same background, same education, same worldview. It's comfortable, it's easy, but it's limiting. The most powerful teams are diverse. Not diverse for diversity's sake, but diverse because different viewpoints create better outcomes. Because blind spots get covered. Because innovation happens at the intersection of different ideas. Cade and Saren didn't just tolerate their differences. They weaponized them, turned them into an advantage, made them the foundation of something stronger than either could build alone. Fifth, let's talk about the widow specifically. Saren had lost everything. Her mate, her home, her community. She could have been bitter, closed off, focused only on her own survival. Instead, she chose to fight for others. For a species she'd never met. For people who couldn't repay her. For a cause that had no guarantee of success. That's the mark of true strength. Not fighting for what you have, but fighting for what others need. Even when you're broken yourself. Grief changes people. Loss can make you smaller, more afraid, more protective of whatever you have left. Or it can make you bigger, more empathetic, more determined that others won't suffer what you suffered. Saren chose the second path. And in doing so, she didn't just save humanity. She saved herself, found purpose in her pain, turned her loss into something meaningful. If you've lost something or someone important, this matters. Your pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you use what you've learned to help others, to make their path easier, to ensure they don't face what you faced alone. That's how we honor what we've lost. Not by hiding from the world, but by making the world better because we were in it. Sixth, trust as a strategic advantage. The coalition didn't trust humans. Earth Command didn't trust the coalition. Both sides had good reasons. Historical precedent, fear of betrayal, political pressure from hardliners who wanted isolation. But Cade and Saren trusted each other. Against all advice. Against all logic. And that trust became the foundation of an alliance that saved both civilizations. Trust is always a risk. Always. There's no such thing as guaranteed trust. Someone can always betray you, disappoint you, let you down. But without trust, you can't build anything that matters. Can't create partnerships. Can't form teams. Can't achieve goals bigger than yourself. The key is this. Trust isn't blind. Cade and Saren earned each other's trust through actions. Through consistency. Through demonstrated values. Saren risked her life for strangers. Cade chose to listen before judging. Both of them followed through on their commitments even when it cost them. That's how real trust works. You start small. You test. You verify. And when someone proves themselves, you give them a little more trust. And a little more. Until you've built something solid. But you have to start. You have to take that first risk. Otherwise, you're just the coalition before the war. Safe. Isolated. And ultimately vulnerable because you have no allies when you need them. 7th. The long-term view. Saren's choice to save Cade had immediate consequences. Some good. Some terrible. But the full impact took months to play out. The final result? Couldn't have been predicted on day one. We live in a world that demands instant results. Instant gratification. Instant certainty about whether our choices were right or wrong. But real change takes time. Relationships take time. Trust takes time. Building something that matters takes time. Cade and Saren didn't see the full picture when they started. They just took the next right step. And then the next one. And the next. That's all any of us can do. Make the best choice we can with the information we have. Then deal with the consequences. Then make the next choice. One step at a time towards something better. Don't let the fear of unknown outcomes paralyze you. You'll never have perfect information. You'll never know for sure how things will turn out. But doing nothing is also a choice. And usually the worst one. Finally, the power of hope over fear. Fear told the coalition to hide. Hope told them to fight. Fear told Cade to report and retreat. Hope told him to save Saren. Fear told both governments to stay isolated. Hope told two individuals to build a bridge. Every major decision in this story came down to hope versus fear. And every time someone chose hope, things got better. Not easy. Not simple. But better. Fear protects you in the short term. But it limits you in the long term. Keeps you small. Safe. Stuck. Hope expands you. Opens possibilities. Creates opportunities. Connects you to others who share your vision. The world needs more people who choose hope. Who see problems and think, maybe we can fix this. Instead of, there's nothing we can do. Who see strangers and think, potential friend. Instead of, potential threat. Who see change and think, opportunity. Instead of, danger. That doesn't mean being naive. Saren wasn't naive. Cade wasn't naive. They both knew the risks. They both understood the costs. But they chose to act anyway. Because hope without action is just wishful thinking. But hope with action? That changes the world. Before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. Not even Cade and Saren themselves. After the war ended, after the Krithan threat was finally neutralized, the Coalition and Earth formalized their alliance. They created a joint council, shared technology, open trade routes, two civilizations learning to work together, building something new from the ashes of war. And Cade and Saren? They were supposed to go back to their regular lives. Mission accomplished. Crisis averted. Time to move on. But here's what happened instead. They couldn't. Not because of orders or duty or political pressure, but because they'd formed something neither of them expected. A partnership that went beyond species. Beyond duty. Beyond even friendship. They'd become essential to each other. Each understood how the other thought. Each covered the other's weaknesses. Each made the other better. The coalition offered Saren a position. High-ranking. Prestigious. Head of interspecies relations. A reward for everything she'd done. She turned it down. Earth Command offered Cade a promotion. Admiral. Command of his own fleet. A hero's position. He turned it down too. Instead, they proposed something that made both governments nervous. A joint independent unit. Not answering to Earth or the coalition, but to both. And to neither. A team dedicated to preventing the next crisis before it started. Operating in the gray spaces where politics couldn't reach. Solving problems that didn't fit neat categories. They called it the Frontier Corps. And they recruited from both species. People who thought differently. Who valued results over procedure. Who understood that sometimes the right answer isn't the legal one. Now here's the final revelation that ties everything together. That first mission where Saren saved Cade? It wasn't random. It wasn't chance. It was inevitable, because the galaxy is full of Krithans. Not literally, but metaphorically. Forces that want to conquer. Systems that prioritize power over justice. Empires that expand by crushing anything in their path. And it's full of coalitions too. Good people who hide. Civilizations that survive by staying small. Species that have given up on fighting for anything better. But now it has something new. A model for how different species can work together. How prey can become hunters when they find allies. How the impossible becomes possible when people refuse to accept the limitations others put on them. Cade and Saren's story spread. Other species heard about the human-veiled alliance. About how cooperation defeated conquest. About how two individuals changed the fate of billions. And it inspired them. Some species joined the alliance. Others formed their own partnerships. The galaxy slowly shifted from isolated civilizations hiding from each other to a network of cooperation. Not everywhere. Not overnight. But the direction changed. The tide turned. All because one widow refused to let one warrior die alone. But here's the thing that makes this story truly matter. The thing that brings it all home. Cade and Saren never thought they'd change the galaxy. They were just trying to do the right thing in the moment they were in. Save a life. Stop a war. Protect people who couldn't protect themselves. They didn't set out to be heroes. They didn't plan to revolutionize interspecies relations. They didn't have some grand vision of a united galaxy. They just kept making the next right choice. And then the next one. And the next. Small choices that accumulated into something massive. Individual actions that inspired collective change. Personal courage that became civilizational transformation. That's the real power of this story. It's not about aliens or spaceships or advanced technology. It's about the truth that every major change in history started with one person deciding to act when everyone else was paralyzed by fear or doubt or rules. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. Tank Man standing in front of military vehicles. Whistleblowers exposing corruption. Scientists challenging established theories. Activists organizing communities. Artists creating work that changes how we see the world. None of them had permission. None of them knew if it would work. None of them could see the full consequences of their actions. But they acted anyway, and the world shifted because they did. Saren and Cade are fictional. The species are made up. The technology doesn't exist. But the principle is real. You have more power than you think. Your choices matter more than you realize. The thing you do today that feels small? It might be the first domino in a chain reaction you can't imagine. Here's what happened in the years that followed. The Frontier Corps grew. Dozens of species joined. Hundreds of missions. Thousands of lives saved. Crisis after crisis prevented before they could explode into war. Cade eventually retired. Went back to Earth. Started a training program teaching new pilots everything he'd learned. Not just tactics, but philosophy. How to see past species. How to build trust across difference. How to be strong and compassionate at the same time. Saren stayed active longer. She loved the work too much to stop. Eventually, she became an ambassador. The first veiled to address the entire galactic community. She used that platform to tell their story. To remind everyone how close they'd come to disaster. And how cooperation saved them. They stayed in touch their entire lives. Visited when they could. Shared messages when they couldn't. That bond they'd formed in those desperate early days? It never faded. Different species. Different worlds. Different lifespans even. But connected in a way that transcended all of it. And when Saren finally passed away, decades later, she left behind a legacy that shaped the entire galaxy. The widow nobody expected had become the mother of a new era. One where species worked together instead of apart. Where difference was strength instead of threat. Where hope proved stronger than fear. Kate spoke at her memorial. Humans and aliens gathered together to honor someone who'd changed all their lives. His words were simple but powerful. She saved me that day in space. But I wasn't the only one. She saved all of us. By showing us what we could be when we choose courage over fear. Connection over isolation. Hope over despair. We owe her everything. And the best way to honor her is to live the way she did. With eyes open to need. With hands ready to help. With hearts brave enough to care about people we've never met. That's the story of the alien widow nobody expected. and the last human warrior she saved, and the galaxy they changed together by refusing to accept that things had to stay the way they were. If this opened your eyes, let me leave you with the 3 biggest takeaways from Cade and Saren's story. First, individual choices create collective change. You don't need permission to do the right thing. You don't need authority to make a difference. You just need courage and consistency. Second, connection across difference is possible. Whether it's species, cultures, backgrounds, or beliefs, the things that unite us are stronger than the things that divide us. But you have to be willing to see past the surface. Third, hope is a strategic advantage. Fear keeps you alive. Hope makes you unstoppable. Choose which one guides your decisions. These aren't just sci-fi concepts. They're principles you can apply today, in your relationships, your work, your community, anywhere you see a problem and think, someone should do something. You're someone. And today is when you can start. If this story resonated with you, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to HFY stories that explore what makes humanity special. Stories about courage, resilience, hope, and our refusal to give up even when everything says we should. There are dozens more stories like this waiting for you. Tales of humans facing impossible odds, forming unlikely alliances, proving that heart and determination can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Next up, I've got a story about a human diplomat who united 3 warring species with nothing but words and stubbornness. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. And here's my question for you. If you could form an alliance with any fictional alien species, who would it be and why? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and the best answers might inspire future stories. Thanks for watching. And remember, the galaxy changes when individuals refuse to accept that it can't. See you in the next one.